Welcome to the debate. Today we are opening the pages of a book that presents itself as a simple weekend hobby guide, but actually contains, I think, a pretty profound philosophical conflict about how we interact with nature. We're looking at simple steps to success, herbs.
Hmm.
Now, if you just look at the cover of this book, you see fresh greens, you see promise, you see a salad waiting to happen. But when you actually scrutinize the directives inside, the text, the captions, the warnings, you find two completely different definitions of what a garden actually is. So we're looking at the conflict between the herb garden as a utilitarian production space, a factory for yield and chemistry, versus the herb garden as an aesthetic landscape feature, designed for sensory experience and form.
It's a fascinating duality, really, because it forces the reader to answer a question that I think most gardeners just avoid. What is the definition of success? I mean, the title promises success, but is that measured by the volume of the harvest and the chemical potency of the oils?
Right.
Or is success measured by the visual architecture, the color palettes, the integration of texture into a living space? I come at it from a different way than you do. I believe the text builds a case that the true value of these plants lies in their ornamental capacity, their ability to, as the text says, add color and excitement to the garden rather than just flavor to the pot.
I see the temptation to view it that way. I do. And certainly the book contains some beautiful photography. But I am not convinced by that line of reasoning, because the foundational structure of the text is built on rigor, control, and consumption. So my position is that this material argues for a utilitarian and cultivation perspective. The core promise is success, and the text explicitly links that success to plant health, soil chemistry, precise propagation, and of course the safety of the harvest for culinary and medicinal use. If you ignore the science, you don't have a garden, you have a compost heap.
A compost heap? That's a bit harsh, isn't it?
Not if you look at the results of poor planning. When I read the position statements of this book, specifically that Getting Started section, I see a manual for a laboratory, not an art gallery. The text is incredibly specific about the groundwork. It states clearly, a plant growing in the wrong place or under duress will never perform well. It doesn't say it won't look good, it says it won't perform. That is the language of a machine or a crop. The text details the use of soil testing kits, specifically mentioning using barium sulfate to determine pH levels. It distinguishes between seeds that germinate simply and those that need a specific mechanical intervention. This all implies that the primary relationship between the human and the plant is one of cultivation and control to ensure a predictable outcome.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the laboratory is the primary lens here. You're focusing on all the mechanics, but the goal described in the text is often purely social and visual. The text explicitly says that this groundwork pays dividends in the looks of envy from neighbors. Now, that is not a utilitarian metric. That's a vanity metric. That is about aesthetics. Furthermore, the text highlights herbs in mixed beds and patterns with herbs. It showcases herb parterre and herbs growing between railway sleepers. I mean, these are design choices, not agricultural ones. If the goal were purely production, you would plant in rows for ease of harvest. But the text encourages woven herb baskets and living walls. The success here is defined by how the garden feels and looks, not just what you can cut from it.
I think we need to dive a little deeper into that groundwork aspect you mentioned, because this is where the utilitarian argument really solidifies for me. Let's talk about the environment. The text doesn't just suggest you plant things, it demands you modify the geology of your site to suit the biological needs of the crop. Look at the section on assessing your soil. We have images of test tubes, chemical reagents, color charts. It instructs the reader to dig a test pit, fill it with water, and wait overnight just to check drainage. It advises adding coarse sand to improve drainage or organic matter to improve structure. This is scientific isolation. It's about creating a perfectly controlled environment.
Hold on. Let's just pause on the barium sulfate bit you mentioned earlier. For the listeners who haven't donned a white coat since high school chemistry, let's explain what's actually happening there. The text is asking you to take a sample of your soil, mix it with a chemical powder, barium sulfate, and water, and then watch the color change. It's a pH test.
Exactly. It measures the acidity or alkalinity of the soil.
Right. But why does the text ask you to do that? You say it's for control. I say it's so you can play matchmaker. The text isn't saying change your soil to fit this one specific crop. It's saying know your soil so you can choose the plants that will look beautiful there. It's all about curation.
No, it is about optimization. If the pH is wrong, the plant cannot uptake nutrients. It literally starves. The text advises adding lime to raise the pH or sulfur to lower it. That is active intervention to modify the environment. Even the container gardening section is about engineering, drilling half-inch holes in the base of a wooden planter, calculating the timber width squared. It even suggests using copper tape as a slug barrier. This isn't about making a statement with a plant. It is about protecting an asset and optimizing a biological system for yield.
That is a compelling argument, but have you considered the context in which these soil instructions are applied? You talk about isolation, but the text offers this whole counter-narrative of integration. The section Herbs in Mixed Beds shows Salvia officinalis, that's sage, planted right alongside Lycaenis chalcedonica and Allium christophi.
Which is a complete nightmare for harvesting. I mean, you have to step over the flowers just to get to the herbs.
But it's a dream for the eyes. The Lycaenis has these brilliant, fiery red Maltese cross flowers, and the sage provides this dusty gray textured backdrop. It's a visual composition. The text shows Cinara, the cardoon, or artichoke, used for making a statement because of its architectural height and silver foliage. The text is telling us that these plants are not just crops to be managed in a sterile environment. They are textural elements. It explicitly mentions planting in unlikely places, such as between paving slabs. Now, from a purely utilitarian standpoint, planting between paving slabs is incredibly inefficient. The soil volume is restricted, harvest is difficult because you're kneeling on concrete.
Sure.
But from an aesthetic standpoint, it softens the hardscaping and releases scent when you walk on it. The text values that sensory advantage over the optimized soil chemistry that you're fixated on.
I see the aesthetic appeal there. I do. But let's look at what happens when you actually try to grow these things. The text moves from environment to propagation, how we actually create the life in the garden. And here the obsession with control is it's undeniable. The growing your own from seed section is a blueprint for rigorous management. It instructs on dibbing holes.
Dibbing. Sounds like a made-up word.
It's a very precise horticultural term. A dibber is a tool, often just a rounded stick, used to create a clean hole of a specific depth. The text instructs you to use this for large seeds so they are at the exact right depth to germinate. But for fine seeds, it switches to pinching and scattering. It specifies a 50-50 vermiculite and fine compost mix. Note the precision there. It doesn't just say, throw some dirt in a pot. It's a specific ratio.
Let's just clarify vermiculite for a second. That's the stuff that looks like shiny little rocks, right?
Yes. It's a mineral that expands when it's heated. It's sterile, it's light, and it retains moisture while allowing air to get to the roots. The text prescribes this mix because a heavy garden soil would suffocate delicate seedlings. It's engineering the substrate. And then there is the technique of pinching out to encourage side shoots. Why? To prevent plants from becoming leggy.
Leggy is another one of those terms. It sounds like a good thing for a runway model, but bad for a plant.
In a plant, leggy means it is grown tall and thin with weak stems and large gaps between the leaves, usually because it's stretching for light. A leggy plant is a failure in the utilitarian view because it is weak and produces less foliage per square inch. The text is teaching the reader to manipulate the plant's hormones, specifically by removing the apical bud to stop vertical growth, to maximize the productive lifespan and the yield of the leaves.
It's interesting you mentioned leggy plants as a failure. I come at it from a different way. The text discusses resuscitating leggy plants, not just as a repair job, but as an opportunity for division and multiplication. It acknowledges that plants change and get messy. But more importantly, look at the lazy cuttings method the text describes.
Lazy implies a lack of rigor, which really supports my point that the other methods are the correct ones.
Or or it implies efficiency by observing nature. The text points out that herbs like thyme and chamomile produce aerial roots naturally. That means if a stem just touches the ground, it starts growing roots all on its own. The text suggests utilizing that natural behavior, just detaching a piece that's already rooting. That isn't the heavy-handed control of dibbing and vermiculate ratios. That is working with the wild, spreading nature of the plant. And speaking of spreading, look at how the text handles invasive roots like mint. You might see that as a problem to be contained in a pot, but the text also implies a certain vigor that fills space. The wilder design element, the overflowing baskets, the thymes growing in a wall basket, they rely on that chaotic, expansive growth that you seem to want to pinch and prune into submission.
I'm not against vigor, but vigor without direction is just weeds. And the ultimate direction of this garden, according to the text, is the harvest. This is where the utilitarian argument becomes, I think, unassailable. The section harvesting herbs doesn't mince words. It breaks down the plant into consumable parts. Flowers, like nasturtiums for salads, leaves for basil and lettuce, seeds for fennel and dill, and roots for horseradish. It treats the garden as a pantry, but more critically, it treats the garden as a pharmacy, where precision is a matter of life and death.
Life and death? You're making gardening sound like bomb disposal.
When you are dealing with botany, it can be. The text contains a very severe warning. Never eat a herb unless you are sure you know what it is. It highlights cautionary herbs like rutagravuolens, rue. This isn't just about pretty colors. It's about knowing that this plant is dinner and that plant is a skin irritant. The categorization of the plants is functional. The kitchen garden section explicitly discusses crop planning. If the primary goal were aesthetics, the distinction between edible and toxic would be secondary to color coordination. But here, the safety of the consumption is paramount. You need to know your Latin names, not to sound smart, but to survive your salad.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the presence of cautionary herbs supports the utilitarian view. In fact, I think it proves the exact opposite. Why would the text include aconitum, monkshood, or digitalis, foxglove at all?
As warnings, surely.
No, look at the placement. Aconitum is highly toxic. You can't eat it. You shouldn't even handle it without gloves because the alkaloids can be absorbed through the skin. It causes heart palpitations. So why is it in a book about success with herbs? Because as the images show, it has stunning, tall purple spikes. It provides vertical structure. The text includes Taxus baccata, that's yew, which is poisonous, and Elcamilla mollis, which isn't for eating. These plants are there purely for their excellent ornamental qualities. They are there for the looks of envy. If this were just a kitchen garden manual, those plants would be excluded. Their inclusion signals that the success the title refers to includes the creation of a beautiful, dangerous, complex landscape, where Hamamelis virginiana, witch hazel, is prized for its winter flowers, not its caloric content. The garden is a canvas, and sometimes a canvas includes dark or dangerous colors for contrast.
That is a fair point regarding the non-culinary herbs, but I would argue that even their inclusion is framed through a lens of botanical knowledge and management. You have to know how to grow the monkshood safely, but let's look at the container section again. We see contemporary pots and stone troughs. You might see design, but I see the text emphasizing drainage and mobility.
Mobility for what purpose, though?
To move the plant to the optimal sun position, or to move it indoors when the frost comes. The text describes watering cans and the specific technique of drilling drainage holes. It's all about the hydraulics of the system. Even when the text shows a single pot of lavender, it identifies it as Lavandula stoicis. The specificity of the Latin names, Menthopulegium, Symphodium, throughout the text reinforces that this is a scientific endeavor. You cannot have the aesthetic result without the rigorous application of horticultural science. The beauty you admire is the output of the groundwork I defend.
And I would counter that the science is merely the servant of the aesthetic. The text shows herbs in containers not just for drainage, but for architectural effect. It pairs silver foliage with terracotta. It discusses woven herb baskets. Now, be honest. A woven basket is a terrible container for moisture retention compared to plastic. It dries out incredibly fast.
It is inefficient, yes. You'd be watering it twice a day in the summer.
Exactly. But it's chosen for its rustic visual appeal. The text encourages making a statement with plants. It talks about unlocking the hidden talents of your herbs. Those hidden talents are often the scent of the foliage or the color of the bloom, things that feed the soul, not the stomach. When the text talks about Atriplex hortensis rubra, red orich, it highlights the purple hue. The utility of the plant as a spinach substitute is almost secondary to its visual impact in a border.
But Atriplex creates that impact only if it isn't bolting prematurely, which brings us right back to the section on common problems and plants quick to bolt.
Bolting, that's another term we should probably unpack.
Bolting is when a plant shifts its energy from producing leaves, which we want to eat, to producing flowers and seeds, which we usually don't want. It's usually triggered by heat or water stress. So a lettuce that bolts sends up a tall stalk, it flowers, and the leaves turn incredibly bitter. The text treats bolting as a failure of the crop. It advises on seed germination speeds specifically to avoid this. It's managing the life cycle for the human schedule.
Or it's managing the life cycle to prolong the season of beauty. A bolted lettuce looks ragged, it falls over, it turns yellow. But look at chives. A well-maintained pot of chives with those purple pom-pom flowers is delightful. The text specifically mentions leaving chive flowers because they are edible and pretty. It's the integration of the two.
It is the integration, but the hierarchy remains. Form follows function. You pinch the basil not just to make it bushy, but to stop it from flowering so the leaves stay sweet. The aesthetic of the bushy plant is a side effect of the culinary requirement.
And I say function enables form. You pinch the basil so you have a lush green mound that looks beautiful in the terracotta pot on your patio. The fact that it tastes good is the bonus. If the basil tasted good but looked like a dead stick, we wouldn't put it in a decorative pot by the door.
We might, if we were hungry enough, but I suppose that brings us to the crux of the disagreement. We are nearing the end of our analysis, so let's attempt to synthesize these positions. You believe that simple steps to success, herbs ultimately define success as the creation of a sensory, visual experience, a garden that delights the eye and the nose, even if the plants are toxic or growing in unlikely places like patio cracks.
Precisely. While the technical skills are necessary, they are the means to an end. The ultimate expression of the herb garden in this text is one of beauty. You know, lavender in contemporary pots, thymes cascading from wall baskets, and that extra sensory advantage of scent. A garden focused only on utility misses the joy of the hidden talents of herbs. The text invites us to create a space that neighbors envy, not just a space that fills the freezer. It's about the joy of being in the space, not just using it.
And my position remains that the text is a manual for cultivation and control. A plant growing in the wrong place will never perform well. The aesthetic beauty you love is entirely dependent on the utilitarian groundwork, the soil testing, the drainage drills, the specific propagation mixes, and the safety protocols of the harvest. You cannot have the form without the function. The garden described is a machine for production, even if that machine happens to be elegant. Without the laboratory mindset, the gallery falls apart.
It seems the text presents a true paradox then. The herb garden is both a laboratory for propagation and chemistry and a canvas for design and texture.
Indeed, it suggests that perhaps the most successful gardener is the one who can wear the white coat of the scientist while holding the brush of the artist. You need the barium sulfate to get the soil right so that the aconitum can grow tall and purple.
And maybe knowing that the aconitum can kill you makes it just a little bit more beautiful to look at. A little danger in the garden never hurt anyone. Well, as long as you don't eat it.
A dangerous thought to end on, but a valid one. We encourage our listeners to explore the material themselves to see how cautionary and culinary herbs can coexist, and to decide if they are planting for the kitchen or the view.
It's a choice that defines every garden.
Thank you for listening to The Debate.